The truth is this: they no longer pray to God, and I no longer know if they ever did. Final letter from Brother Damien, never delivered. A blood-stained scroll was found by a royal courier, buried beneath a pile of dead leaves on the edge of the forest trail. The words were shaky, written in haste. The seal of the Elmsvale Priory still intact, but when the king's men arrived at the village, they found no one. Nothing but open doors, extinguished candles, and a silence, deafening. The wind blew with the taste of iron. It was late autumn, and the dry leaves danced like restless souls through the halls of St. Albion Monastery. Among them, there was a different young man, Thomas of Larkmoor, only 19 years old, thin as a brittle branch, eyes too brown to seem naive. But naive he was. Raised by monks since the age of 5, Thomas had never known the world beyond the monastery walls. Everything he knew came from books and from faith. That morning, he was summoned to the abbot's chamber. A dark room, perfumed with incense and candles that never burned out.
"Have been chosen, Thomas,"
said old Abbot Berenger in a hoarse voice.
"Delicate mission."
On the table, a sealed scroll, and beside it, a small iron cross, but heavy.
"There's a village called Elmsvale, south of the Grey Forest. The local priory sent letters reporting strange happenings, disappearances, heresies, visions. The messengers we sent did not return."
Thomas swallowed hard.
Why me?
"Because you are pure, still untouched by the sins of the world. They might hear you."
The next day, Thomas was given a weary horse and a patched cloak. No one would go with him. It was better that way, they said, for true faith must walk alone. The journey to Elmsvale took 2 days, but on the very first, the world began to change. The paths stopped looking like paths. The forest closed in around him. The birds disappeared. The wind ceased. And then, silence. A silence that was not merely the absence of sound. It was like a shroud, covering everything, muffling even his own thoughts. Thomas felt the crucifix on his chest grow warm, despite the cold. On the morning of the 3rd day, Elmsvale appeared like a whisper among the trees. Low houses, blackened thatched roofs, dry fields, and a well in the center of the village covered by a torn tarp. Nothing stirred. He entered slowly, leading the horse by the reins.
Peace of Christ,
he said, trying to sound firm. Nothing. No reply. Doors shut. Windows sealed. Absolute silence. Until, creak. A door creaked open on its own, like a warning. It was the church, atop the small hill. On the steps, a lit candle. Even with the wind, even with the damp air, Thomas held his breath and climbed. Inside the church, the atmosphere was wrong. Not exactly hostile, but distorted, like a dreamt memory of a sacred place. The statues of saints were draped in dark veils. The altar stained with something that wasn't wax. The pulpit empty, but it seemed to watch. He knelt.
Lord, be with me.
"Not here,"
answered a faint voice behind him. Thomas turned quickly. A child, standing at the church door, looking at the floor.
"They don't listen in this place."
She whispered.
"But he hears, always hears."
Who is he?
The child raised her eyes and smiled, a toothless smile. Then she ran off, but her steps made no sound. With no shelter, Thomas found refuge in the old village inn, covered in dust and abandonment. The beds untouched, the fireplace cold, but atop the counter, 3 bowls of hot soup, still steaming. He didn't touch them, but the bowls were there. At the fireplace, he found an old journal. On the cover, a faded name, but inside, pages filled with short, repeated phrases. "He is beneath the earth. They dug too deep. Faith does not enter here." In the middle of the night, the sound of bells echoed through the village, but the church bell was broken, and Thomas saw, through the window, shapes moving slowly in a circle in the square. Each held a candle, no faces visible. He closed his eyes, but the candle in his room lit on its own. The next morning, the village seemed more alive, but not in a good way. Half-open doors, eyes peering through cracks, footsteps echoing, but with no one around. Thomas decided to explore. With his prayer book in hand and the crucifix on his chest, he went to the central well, covered by a torn tarp. As he pulled the tarp away, the air grew heavier. The inside of the well was deeper than it looked, much deeper, and inside, symbols had been scorched into the stone. Circles, eyes, open hands, and then he heard it. Something tapping down there, not loudly, but rhythmically. Tap, tap, tap. 3 knocks, as if someone inside was waiting for an answer. On the street beside him, Thomas was called by an old woman, cloaked in black. She wore a necklace with a twisted crucifix.
A new priest?
She asked, with a smile that never reached her eyes.
I'm just a brother of faith. I came to help.
Help?
She laughed.
Then ask him to give me back my grandson and my tongue.
She opened her mouth, and there was nothing inside, just a hole where the tongue should have been, but she had just spoken. At the village's old forge, he found Dorian, a retired blacksmith. He was cleaning a mirror with black wax.
You saw the well?
He asked without looking up.
You're the first to see it in days.
Is something down there trying to get out?
No, it already got out.
Thomas felt his heart race.
Oh, and why did no one do anything?
Because we stared too long, and now we only see from the inside.
And the mirror began to fog on its own. Thomas stepped closer. In the reflection, he no longer saw the blacksmith. He saw 2 versions of himself, one praying, the other watching him with black eyes and a faint smile, as if it already knew the ending. Thomas returned to the inn before sunset. He wanted to write a report, call for reinforcements, maybe flee, but the words wouldn't come. When he tried to write faith, it became hunger. When he wrote Christ, the ink formed circle. The pages filled themselves. Lines like, "Let the candle burn to the end." They eat the voice first, then the mind, and then the candle went out. He felt the floor vibrate, not like an earthquake, but like breathing. The entire house exhaled and inhaled. At 3 in the morning, he awoke to distorted chants coming from the square. He peeked through the window. All the villagers were kneeling in the mud, eyes to the ground, singing softly. At the center, a child with blindfolded eyes held a stone. Beside her, a body covered by a white cloth. The chanting grew louder.
He
walks beneath the circle.
He
He watches the lamb.
The new will come.
The new will come through the sealed mouth.
Thomas ran downstairs, but when he stepped outside, the square was empty and the body had vanished. He returned to his room in despair.
Lord, what is happening here? Why did you send me to this place?
Silence. And then, for the first time, he doubted. He doubted the mission, the voice he heard at the monastery, his own faith, and outside, the sound of children laughing, not playing, laughing at someone, at him. The sun rose, or seemed to rise. The light entering through the window didn't warm. It had a greenish, pale hue, like a dying candle. Thomas awoke with marks on his hands, as if he had scratched himself during the night, or someone had held him while he slept. Beside him, on the sheet, a black flower. Alive, gently pulsing, as if breathing. He crushed it, but the blood that oozed from it was his own. Without thinking, Thomas fled the inn. He followed the village's main trail to the worn wooden gate. He pushed hard. Nothing. Locked from the inside. He tried to climb the side wall, but the wooden fence now seemed to have sharp tips, like teeth turned inward. He returned through the forest path, ran for half an hour, marked a tree with his prayer book, continued. Another half hour, and then the same marked tree, the same dry well in the middle of the path. He had gone in circles, but swears He never turned. Exhausted, he fell to his knees.
Lord, get me out of here.
But the voice that answered wasn't external, nor heavenly. It was his own, but deeper, calmer, and cruel.
You're already here. There is no inside or out. There is only him.
Thomas covered his ears, but the voice continued from within, as if each heartbeat whispered a new word, a reversed prayer.
Non serviam, non serviam, non serviam.
Back in the village, the streets were more crowded. People stood still, eyes staring into nothing. Smiles too long to be real. A boy with a rope around his neck swayed slowly in an invisible game. But no one moved, except one, the blacksmith, Dorian.
The sun rose, or seemed to rise.
I don't understand.
You're beginning to. That's what he wants. For you to listen first, then speak for him.
Back in the room, Thomas searched for the crucifix. But the metal was no longer cold, nor warm. It was empty, as if that symbol no longer held meaning there. He tried to pray, looking into the mirror, but in the reflection, he didn't move. Thomas moved his arms, cried, but the reflection remained still, staring at him, as if it were the real version. And then, slowly, the reflection smiled. By night's end, the walls began to sweat. Droplets slid down, forming letters, words he had never read before. But he understood. You are the chosen flesh, faith rots. The circle shall open. He tried to leave the room, but the door had vanished. In its place, a mirror, and inside it, a version of himself, praying in reverse. The next morning, Thomas awoke inside the church, but he didn't remember going there. He was kneeling, hands over his chest. The prayer book opened to a page written in blood. You are the fourth. The three denied. You will accept. Around him, all the villagers were kneeling as well. Men, women, children, eyes closed. As if in a trance, the altar was draped in a dark purple veil. And there, before him, the host. It was the second time Thomas had seen the being. Or rather, something wearing a human form. Black robe, no feet. It floated slightly above the ground. The face looked like melted wax over a skull. No eyes, but a third eye open on the forehead, always fixed on Thomas.
3 came, 3 failed. You will come and speak.
Thomas wanted to flee, but his knees wouldn't obey. He wanted to scream, but his voice was outside. Literally, it echoed from the pulpit and said, I accept. In monastic tradition, monks take 3 vows: poverty, chastity, and obedience. But the host whispered the 4th.
Silence.
Thomas was forced to repeat.
I vow silence, not of the mouth, but of the soul.
And then, time froze. The candles stopped burning. The host stopped floating. The villagers became statues. Only Thomas moved, or thought he moved, and he heard music, ancient notes, like a drowned choir's chants. The church stones began to shift, slowly, as if they were breathing, as if they were forming a face. His face. The floor opened in a circle. Beneath the altar, a spiral stone staircase, descending into an underground heart, where the light was red and pulsing. The host pointed.
Descend. There lie the others, and what is left of God.
Thomas descended, step by step, counting 7 steps. 7 times. 7 chants whispered in the dark. On the walls, carved faces screamed silently, like souls trapped within the temple. At the end, a round room. In the center, a stone table, and on it, the body of a monk. Mouth sewn shut, chest opened. Inside the chest, a mirror. Thomas approached, looked into the mirror, and saw himself, but older, sitting on the village throne, the villagers kneeling. The inverted cross above, and his own lips murmuring something.
The word became flesh ... and the flesh fell silent.
When he returned to the church, all the villagers bowed before him. The host had vanished. The pulpit stood empty, and the bells rang, with no rope, no wind. They rang from within. Thomas smiled for the first time, but not with his own lips. Thomas awoke in the room at the inn, but everything was too tidy. The bed made, the fireplace lit, a tray with fresh bread and milk beside it. On the table, a new tunic, neatly folded. It looked like the monks from St. Albion, but with one difference. The cross on the chest was inverted. 3 knocks at the door. Always 3. Upon opening, he found a group of villagers in ceremonial robes. At the front, an old woman, eyes completely white, holding a small leather-bound book.
Has left, but he left everything prepared. You are the new Watcher.
Watcher of what?
Thomas asked, his voice trembling.
Silence, to ensure he never has to call again. Because now, you already hear.
Led him to the village center. The streets were covered in dead leaves and symbols drawn in ash. All the villagers waited, kneeling, heads lowered. Absolute silence. In the center of the square, a rustic throne made of branches, bones, and melted candles. Thomas hesitated.
Him not, him.
A man from the crowd answered.
Even he is him, but you, Adi, what remains?
He was forced to sit. The crowd lifted their heads. One by one, the villagers came to him, placed hands on his chest, whispered in ancient tongues, and left drops of blood on his feet.
It's a baptism,
said the old woman.
but not with water. With what he spills ... when he listens.
Back in the church, Thomas found the old sacred books burned. In their place, new books, handwritten, with dark ink, on pages made of skin. He opened them, expecting blasphemies. But what he saw were prayers. They seemed Christian. But there was a subtle deviation. The structure was familiar, but the focus wasn't forgiveness. It was silence, obedience, surrender. That night, he tried to pray alone, and he did. For the first time in days, he managed to say,
Our Father, who art...
But the voice was cut off by another, from inside his throat. Deeper, calmer, and more powerful.
He is no longer in the heavens, he is beneath our feet, and his will is already done.
Thomas dreamed. He was inside the crypt, before the host. But now, he wore the black robe. Around him, the 3 previous monks, the ones who had failed. They were chained, eyes torn out, tongues cut, but smiling.
You succeeded, because you never truly believed.
Thomas awoke with his body floating, a few centimeters above the floor, the inn's floor, covered in burnt barefoot prints. Night fell like a soaked cloth over Elmsvale. In the church tower, the bells rang once, then silence. Thomas sat alone at the altar, staring at his hands. They trembled less now, because he no longer resisted.
Was it all because of my faith, or my lack of it?
He murmured. And then, he heard footsteps behind the sacristy, dragging old.
The answer, brother,
said a frail voice,
is not in what you believe, but in who you've been listening to all along.
From the shadows emerged a hunched man, cloaked in a worn habit. His eyes were burned, sewn shut with copper thread. In his hand, a rosary with coal-black beads.
My name is Brother Lucian. I am the last of the original priory. The others failed, tried to flee, or to preach.
Why didn't you die?
Thomas asked.
Because I heard first, and silenced myself before he could hear my scream.
Lucian handed over an ancient scroll, folded 7 times.
This came with the village's founders, before the Christian cross ever touched this land. Before silence found a voice.
Thomas read. Words in corrupted Latin, but he understood. Do not raise temples over the rift, for it is alive, and it hears. The altar of the first sound was opened. The word fell. The echo created the world.
The first monks dug too deep. They wanted to purify the land with prayers, but they opened what should never have been touched.
Then the host.
He was the first to hear, and he never stopped listening.
And me?
You were born for this. Thomas, chosen among the pure, the obedient. Because pure flesh carries sound better. You are not the savior. You are the conductor.
Lucian stood up.
I blinded myself to avoid seeing the circle. Silenced myself to avoid repeating. But you've already seen, already spoken.
He extended a ceremonial dagger, but before Thomas could reply, Lucian fell dead, eyes sewn shut, smiling, and his mouth was open, breathing out a sound like a high-pitched whistle that only Thomas could hear. Night in Elmsvale was different now. No wind, no owls, no rustling leaves, but for the first time there was sound, a whisper from all directions, an echo with no source, a voiceless prayer. All the villagers gathered in the square, kneeling, black robes, heads down, eyes closed. In the center, the throne of bones and branches, empty, but not for long. Thomas emerged from between the houses. He didn't walk, he glided. His robe was dark, and embroidered upon it was a new symbol, a circle. Inside it, a mouth. No eyes, no ears, only the mouth. Around him, children scattered black salt in spirals, and candles were lit by breath, not by flame. Thomas stood before the throne. He looked at the faces.
The word has returned. He does not speak, but commands. And I am no longer me. I am what's left of him.
The old woman with white eyes appeared with a clay bowl. Inside, melted wax mixed with the blood of former monks. Thomas placed his hands inside, wet his fingers, and drew an inverted symbol on his forehead.
With this seal, I silence my soul. I cut the root of doubt, and I let the echo live.
He sat on the throne, closed his eyes, and smiled. Then, the bells rang, but not the church bells. Those no longer existed. The bells came from beneath the earth. Each toll made the ground pulse, like a giant heart. The houses trembled. The well opened on its own, and a deep sound emerged.
I hear.
A new royal knight arrived in the village, sent by the clergy. He found clean houses, polite residents, children playing, calm faces, and in the center of the village, a brand new church. The altar, without a cross, the throne, empty.
Where is the spiritual leader of the village?
The knight asked. A boy replied.
He doesn't speak to outsiders. He only listens, always listens.
The knight heard something from the ground, like a slow thumping. Tap, tap, tap. As he lay down, he heard words whispered into his pillow, but there was no one in the room.
You spoke too much, traveler. Here, we listen.